So what is, as you're influencing Americans, which I actually agree with you because even I disseminate your work to this day. But what is your view, or what is the difference, in your opinion, between structural racism and the structural racism, the theory that you were talking about, or the conceptual framework that you were creating then, and systemic racism as we speak about it right now? What are the differences between the two?
I'll tell you the truth. There is no difference between both. I think that the issue is this, and it is an important, language matters. So when I was making my theorization, I was early in my career, and therefore part of the drama of young sociologists and young scholars is to impress their peers. And we believe that to impress peers, we have to use jargon that fits. And unfortunately, jargon that fits only us, not the real world. So for years, I've been trying to urge people to take racism more seriously. And you know that there are variations. Yes, some people call institutional racism, other people systemic racism. I am on the structural racism camp. Recently, I decided after the murder of George Floyd that it was better to use the language of the moment that has captured the imagination of people. And I'm basically calling systemic racism what I used to call structural racism, and using my articulation, my conceptual mapping onto the systemic racism argument, because again, language matters. And for me, ultimately, it's about communicating these big, important ideas to the larger number of people possible, yeah? And if the structural word sounds pedantic or sounds like this guy's an architect or an engineer, time for me to drop the jargon and then be more precise and simple without being simplistic. Yeah, we can be simple without being simplistic.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And I think that you hit one note in particular that I think that far too many academics forget about, which is trying to make the information accessible to the broad public, right? It only matters, none of this matters if it just like stays within the ivory tower. But if we can get out to the public and we can help people to understand the phenomenon that we see around us, then that's when we're able to make like an important impact, in my opinion. And along those lines, can you tell me about the definition of structural and or systemic racism? What's the definition of it? What does it mean?
So in my work, I have said that systemic racism refers to societies where social, political, economic, and even ideological advantages and disadvantages are partially produced along racial lines. And partially because we know that although race is central, it's not all. Race matters, but so does class and gender. But then the second component is, why is it that these advantages and how are the advantages produced along racial lines? So these are the mechanics of the process. And the mechanics have been changing throughout time. And the mechanics involve a number of practices that produce and reproduce white privilege and systemic disadvantage for people of color. And we can think about how those advantages were produced during the slavery period, during the Jim Crow period, and more recently during the period that I have called in my work, the new racism.